What is your word of advice to minority students in Lake Oswego today?
I would say don't be afraid to use your voice right now. Like it's while I hate that structurally there's this whole thing of where like the older you get, the more like people are able to like I guess delegitimize you. Whereas like if you're kind of like I was talking about the panel where as you hear it from the students and they're at that like perfect age or whatever for people to take them seriously or to not do the same kind of like pushback that they might normally do. But it's like when they try and like the it's not the game but it is the game in terms of like trying to silence you in that moment, in that critical moment. Because like if you're a high school, middle school, elementary school student, like these days could shape the rest of your life. Or I shouldn't say could. These days will shape the rest of your life. And if you and it's also the time where like I said you feel most vulnerable. You feel like you don't have the power. And people will try and even if you don't realize how much power you have, I guess. Like when young, because it's not that young people aren't in a position or don't have the capacity to express these thoughts. They absolutely do and will if you give them the platform. But we spend all this time second guessing ourselves, especially at that age. Especially if you're in high school and you're trying to just like I think standing out and everything is cool now, but I'm 30. When I was 15, 16, not so much. I wanted to fit in. I wanted to not be like even when I was came into more of a consciousness about like my blackness and issues and stuff like that. Even then, I still wasn't trying to be like you know just the odd person out willing to just like stand on his own and sway in the wind or whatever. Like so there's a lot of pressure I think at that age to conform, to not rock the boat, to do all these things. But the problem is that people will weaponize that against you later. It's like, well, why didn't you say something when you were 16? Or you're just talking about this now because it's convenient. I don't know what's particularly convenient about this. I don't know what's convenient about being second guessed or questioned or run through the ringer, having to do 8 million meetings to say the same thing over and over again, hoping people will just be like, I guess I'll hear you out. Just I don't know what's convenient about that, but I'm sure one of these people will tell me. But meanwhile, but like especially from like that lesson on the student panel that I learned is that when you hear it from these students, when you hear it in the moment, and like on a larger level with Parkland, like you hear it in the moment, and it can change the landscape. Like students have so much power in their voices that they're just disingenuous. There's a number of disingenuous authority figures that are actively trying to get them to second guess themselves or actively trying to silence them because they know that. They know that it's harder. It's one thing to make the argument against me at 30 or make the argument against someone who's like 50, 60, 70 years old or whatever. You can discount all these other motives, but like it's hard to like it's hard to just shit on a little child or whatever and try and make them seem like some political operative or just frame them as this opportunist or something. Like you can do it, and I mean we have seen it with like the NRA and Parkland and all that, but the NRA has also lost a lot of money. And I heard something, just don't quote me on this, but where they had to like they used to put their like grades of politicians or something like on their front page or something, and then they had to like move that back, or wherever they put it, it's not nearly as prominent as it used to be because it's no longer something that helps funding or helps you get votes the way it does. So you can, like I said, you can directly attribute that to the fact that instead of having to push back against the regular advocates, They tried to do that same thing. They tried to use those same dirty tactics against children. They tried to fight children, and yeah, they got their points out, and yeah, Fox News and some of these other places, echoed them and bolstered that. But at the end of the day, it still hurt them.
It looks really bad.
Yeah, you look like an asshole.
Yeah.
So, and I don't say that so people will just manipulate young people to put out their messages, because that's also, that can happen. That's the reality. But I say it to encourage young people to not be afraid to use their power, not be afraid to use their voice, and to help. Like, they have a lot of power, and just like, I think we have like an imagination deficit almost, and like our problem solving is very limited, especially in places like LO, where people are not they're not thinking about these things, so they're not thinking about 2 or 3 steps past what they see. Like, they see it's not just LO obviously, but like when we think of like activism, when we think about engagement, so many people think about it as just like protesting in the streets, and that's great, don't get me wrong, especially like as a person in the media background. Like, protests are wonderful beyond just the people who are actually engaged in them. Like, if you're writing news stories and you're trying to get people engaged in these issues, protests make for great pictures. They make for people who are on the outside actually reading and caring. Like, it's not just because like all the other meetings and people sitting around the table and talking and doing planning sessions and retreats and all that, it's just as important. It's what makes all this stuff move. But if you're looking for sexy pictures to get people to read the story, watching a bunch of people sitting around a table with laptops and a bunch of sheets of paper and coffee and whatever is not like, ooh, I gotta get involved in that. But you see a crowd in the streets with like these hilarious, snarky but poignant signs, and you're just like yelling, and someone's in a bullhorn and stuff. You're like, I gotta get on that. Or you hear that they shut down this road, or they made the mayor had to address them, or whatever. So like I said, that's important. But in terms of like, there are other factors, and I think a lot of people, especially like students, understand beyond just because they're dealing with it every day, because they're dealing with the brunt of this stuff every day, and from mostly from a stance of a power imbalance. So when you look at it past just like the stuff that makes noise, and you look at it in terms of like organizing around like school board elections, or organizing like things to change curriculum and the day-to-day stuff, or starting groups, like I said, like I wouldn't have thought of a Black student union when I was going to school there. There's still a bunch of people who, like, I say this to them now, it's like, oh my goodness, that's incredible. Like, that's what I talked about when I say expanding the imagination, when I talk about like making connections cross geographically into like Beaverton and Portland, and Tiger and Tualatin, or down in like Eugene, or you have groups starting in places in like Medford and stuff. Like, I should not even say starting in Medford, but you have like this very active activist contingent in Medford right now. Like, and people aren't thinking about these things. Are like in my alma mater, U of O, like a few years ago, the Black Student Task Force demonstrated on campus, which, like I said, fits more into the typical image, but they also had this list of 12 demands, and some of those were like hiring or changing the name of buildings named after Klan leaders, but other things were like, let's start a Black Opportunities Program, let's build a Black Cultural Center, which just a few months ago they started breaking ground on. Let's have African American speaker series, and they're bringing in like Ta-Nehisi Coates and Angela Rye and like all these like engaging national personalities, and it's just like, it's all these things that people were not it's not just the basic, like, it's not just asking, oh, can you treat us equally, or oh, can you treat, it's like, no, we want to carve out our place and carve out our little piece of power. And not just that, but when we do that, when we're empowered and when we feel like fully engaged, fully confident, and like we feel like we're in an opportunity where we can thrive, that helps you. Like that helps, in the sense of like a college or a school environment.
Yeah.
Like you're supposed to be preparing people to be successful in the world. You're supposed to have like, if you want to have like a top research institution, you can't really have a top research institution if your campus doesn't reflect society.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of top research are you going to be doing if it's just the perspective of white people or just the perspective of white guys?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are you actually going to learn about the world that isn't highly skewed?
Mm-hmm.
So like you need all these different perspectives. You need all these people coming with different experiences and ways of thinking, and like use like racial identity, but gender identity, like economic backgrounds, like just we can expand the pool of ideas so much, and we can also have such a more vigorous debate and all these things to come up with the best solutions if we give ourselves the opportunity. But a bunch of people aren't, they're not thinking at that level. Mm-hmm. They're thinking at just like, that's so sad what happened to you. How can, and your story made me sad. Mm-hmm. So how can I not be sad anymore? Mm-hmm. Like, it's not, systemic change. Mm-hmm. But a lot of these young people are like, will say like, this is what we want. This is what we see we could do. This is, and people will listen to them so they can expand, these opportunities. They can galvanize people to really, expand their minds and think bigger and think broader. So I say all that to just say to the young people, don't be afraid to put your voice out there. Don't be afraid. I mean, don't get me wrong, research, do all the things you're supposed to do to, make sure what you're saying is as effective and accurate as possible. But at the same time, also, don't be afraid to be bold. It can be a little awkward. It's definitely vulnerable. But one, you start doing it, the first time you do it and you realize how much power you have, that's going to be empowering in itself. And also, it just gets, more comfortable after a while. Mm-hmm. And it gets more, like speaking out maybe terrifying in the beginning. And then, after a while, it's just like, it's easy. Like I went into respond to racism. I was like, my mom is a co-founder of this organization, and I did, like, when she first started it, I didn't want to go to the meetings, honestly. Like I was like, I don't want to trot out my trauma here for a bunch of white people in Lake Oswego. I don't even live here anymore. Mm-hmm. I'm fine. And in some of those early meetings, like, because we have it broken down to where it's like these breakout sessions where it's like action, learning, dialogue. And I would go into the dialogue sessions and it'd be like, oh, I guess this is, check a white person time again. There was some of that little like awkwardness, but I did get more like quickly become more comfortable in it because I realized there's also other, people of color here. There's people, who want to learn this, who want to either want to learn this or don't know they want to learn this, but once they see that this is a possibility, once they see that this is out there, like, yes, that's what I've been waiting for. Something's been missing, and making, and I realized I found like some comfort in being like, I have, because of my background, because I worked in journalism, I worked at a historically black newspaper. I've, done so much like nonprofit, just stuff around like nonprofit education, business, like minority-owned business related, like writing, and like I said, my parents' history, all my school history, all that. Like, I have all this knowledge that I can share with people, and I was saying it earlier. It's like I've had 20 some odd years to ruminate on so many of these thoughts that I do have something to offer people that can help. And there will be some, occasionally there'll be some people you just butt heads with, but it is what it is. And in some cases it's kind of funny, like it almost feels like you have some people that come to our meetings almost for that. If it's almost like
Mm.
to just like, oh, I don't know if someone is gonna, step in something and Bruce or someone is going to check them on it, but like, I don't know. We had some, it wasn't even like checking someone or anything, but like we had a presentation from Oregon Humanities where they're just talking about like Oregon's history a little bit, and I think there was like a group discussion question about like what's gotten better or what's gotten worse, and when it got to like I forgot like what's gotten better, what's what are you encouraged about now, and everyone had all these like kind of flowery answers, and then it got to me and I was like, we don't do lynchings in public anymore. It's not a it's not a public picnic event anymore, so we've done that. I mean, it's still I think every one of these like police brutality videos that goes viral, that's a form of the same way people would gather around a picnic to watch someone literally be lynched. Is now we just gather around or not gather around, but we scroll through
Everyone watches it.
Facebook news feed, and we litigate. And the worst part is like we spend the time litigating whether what we saw on video was actually what we saw on video. It's like, oh no, there was this excuse, or this person, if you just obeyed orders, or like all these just like ridiculous arguments for like some like make like it's insane. Not to derail because I'm not even answering the question anymore, but just like it's insane for someone to be like, oh yeah, that person deserved to die because they disobeyed orders. Literally, that's all. Like people who are not even like being arrested, or people who are like you're calling to the house for like just these minor offenses, or just like public disturbance or whatever. And there's a whole discussion about policing, and people with just a lot of people who are not getting the services they need, and dealing with like mental health issues especially, and then instead of having counselors or professionals, sending police over to deal with that, and then wondering why it's just like set up to be tragic on top of all the systemic crap that's there. That's another discussion. But did I answer the question?
Yeah, basically like trust your voice, trust yourself, trust your imagination, and like show people that there's something else possible.
Yeah, and there's some. I can't speak for everyone, but there are people out here who will support you.
Mm-hmm.
There are people out here who want to. We may not have all the answers. We may not have all the capacity to do everything, but we'll try and be supportive. We'll try and do, if we don't have the answers, we can try and hook you up with people who do. We can try and fill in the gaps. We can be advocates how we can. And, just like I said, just use that. Like, even you may not know it yet. You may not click now, even when you start doing it. But, one of these days, you're just going to wake up and be like, I am the shit. Like, I've gone through all this. I've spent, 18, 19, 25 years of people making me second guess how great I am. And I'm still here, and I'm still pushing, and I'm still, maybe, what? Maybe I am this. Maybe I am, like, I don't know. My mom always used to tell me, how, special I was or whatever. And, you're like, you think it's like everyone tells you that. And I mean, it's true to an extent, but what's the harm in actually, like, and I don't mean just believing that and like the entitled, just being an asshole to everyone way. But I mean, what is the harm in believing you're as brilliant as people say you are if, as big if you apply it, if you really try and apply, you really try and, make your contribution to the world and you're not harming people, you know, like it's not, I think a lot of us are like afraid to be, you know, we're afraid to be the, especially when you have so many things making you second guess yourself, we're afraid to be as great as we can be, or as strong as we can be, or as smart as we can be. And then, you know, and it is stressful and it is whatever, but then one day when it clicks, like, and I don't want to sit here and say it's like, oh, I had one day where I was like, I'm the man, I'm gonna run out there. But it kind of was like that. And just like, even in some cases, maybe these meetings of just saying like, you know, I have something that other people here don't have, or I have something to offer. I can see like, I have this skill set, I have this knowledge, and I can see this gap where I can apply it, and it can be impactful, and maybe it can help, you know, inspire some others, or it can help, you know, educate others or whatever. And why don't I embrace that? Why don't, you know, I don't just have to fit in. I don't just have to get by. I can, you know, exert my influence. Like I said, if you're trying to contribute to the world, you're not harming anyone, then why not be, you know, all you can be, or why not be, you know, why not kind of put your mark on the world?
Mm.